Most men fear being alone, not because of the silence itself, but because of what it reveals. In the quiet, there are no distractions, no background noise, no audience, just you, and the version of yourself you've been avoiding. You scroll through your phone, check messages that don't matter, and seek validation from people who wouldn't notice your absence. Why? Because the alternative, sitting still and facing your own thoughts, feels unbearable. But here's the truth. The man who cannot sit in silence is a man at war with himself. Solitude is not your enemy, it is your invitation. The world has convinced you that being alone means being unworthy, unloved, or unsuccessful. But the Stoics knew better. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet still carved moments to sit in solitude and reflect. Epictetus, born a slave, found his greatest strength in detachment from the noise of others' opinions. Because in solitude, you don't disappear, you emerge. This is not about becoming a hermit or rejecting society. It's about reclaiming your mind, strengthening your soul, forging a core so solid that no opinion, no rejection, no chaos can break it. You don't need more noise, you need more depth, and that begins when you stop running from solitude and start walking toward it. In today's world, silence is a rare luxury and solitude a forgotten discipline. The modern man is constantly surrounded by noise, notifications buzzing, opinions flowing, screens flashing. We live in a world that rewards speed, reaction, and performance, but punishes stillness. Men wake up and immediately reach for their phones. They scroll, compare, consume, before even looking in the mirror, before asking, "Who am I today?" They've already been told who they should be, but beneath the chaos of the digital age lies a deeper truth. This noise is not harmless. It is a slow erosion of identity, a numbing of intuition, a quiet assassination of authenticity. The Stoics warned us of this. Seneca wrote about the dangers of being pulled in every direction by people's opinions and society's demands. He spoke of anchoring the self, not in popularity or possessions, but in wisdom, virtue, and inner clarity. Yet how can a man think clearly if he never pauses to think at all? This is why solitude is more necessary now than ever before. Not as a retreat from life, but as a return to it, a recalibration of your inner compass. Without it, your values are not your own, your goals are not your own. Even your emotions are dictated by a culture that profits from your confusion. Solitude is not about being disconnected. It's about reconnecting to your thoughts, your values, your standards. Because only in silence do you hear the voice that truly matters, your own. And that brings us to the first great challenge every man must face on the path to self-mastery: the fear of silence. Silence is terrifying for most men, not because of its emptiness, but because of its honesty. In the absence of noise, distractions, and praise, silence becomes a mirror. And what it reflects is not always flattering. That's why so many men fill their days with constant stimulation. They binge content, surround themselves with people, chase novelty, and drown in noise. Because somewhere deep down they know, when the noise stops, the truth begins to speak. And truth, for many, is unbearable. It speaks of regrets, the dreams you abandoned, the chances you never took, the person you once were but let die slowly. It speaks of unresolved pain, of wounds you covered with humor or productivity. It whispers about your broken integrity, the promises you made to yourself and never kept. That's why silence feels like a vault, a dark chamber where all those suppressed truths are stored. Opening it requires courage. But once you do, the very pain you fear becomes the raw material for your transformation. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, often wrestled with self-doubt, mortality, and the weight of responsibility. But he didn't run from those thoughts. He sat with them. He wrote them down. He used silence not to escape, but to enter his own mind, his own soul. In silence, there is no crowd to impress, No role to play, just you, stripped of titles and expectations. This is where the real work begins. But modern men, conditioned to measure their worth by how busy or connected they are, see solitude as failure. They equate loneliness with weakness. They think being alone means being unloved. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is in solitude that your true strength is revealed, not to others but to yourself, because when you're finally alone with your thoughts, you meet the version of yourself you've been hiding from. And in that meeting, you're given a choice: to continue running or to face it all and grow. Facing it is not easy. It requires discipline. It requires you to sit still while every impulse in your body tells you to move, to scroll, to escape. But what if you didn't escape this time? What if you stayed? What if you leaned into the discomfort? You would begin to hear the patterns, the lies you repeat to yourself, the excuses you've memorized, the fears that control your decisions. And slowly, through repetition, awareness is born. You begin to untangle the mess. You begin to see clearly. You begin to rebuild consciously. This is the quiet forge, the place where character is formed, not performed. Think of it like entering a cave. The darkness is overwhelming at first. You can't see your next step. But the longer you stay, the more your eyes adjust. Shapes emerge, meaning surfaces. The fear turns into understanding, and once you've seen the truth in that cave, no one can deceive you, not even yourself. Solitude then becomes a sanctuary, not a prison, a sacred space where healing occurs, where ideas are born, where self-respect is rekindled. It's where you learn to sit with pain without needing to numb it. Where you build mental toughness not from noise, but from stillness. And as that stillness grows inside you, so does your power. Because the man who no longer fears silence cannot be manipulated. He doesn't chase opinions. He doesn't beg to be seen. He is already complete. The man who embraces silence walks through the world differently. He speaks with weight. He chooses his battles wisely. He listens more than he reacts. And people sense it, not because he's loud, but because he's centered. This is the gift of silence. It doesn't just show you who you are, it shows you what you can become. And the first step toward becoming that man is to stop fearing solitude and start using it. But silence alone isn't enough. Once you've faced yourself in that stillness, another trap waits ahead: the addiction to approval. You've faced the silence. You've opened the vault. But now comes another test, one far more subtle, yet just as dangerous: the craving for approval. Most men don't even recognize it. That's what makes it so powerful. It begins innocently. You want to be liked. You want to be accepted. You want her to smile at your message, your boss to nod in agreement, your friends to laugh at your joke. At first, it feels harmless, but over time, this desire mutates into dependency. You start shaping your identity based on what gets you validation. You dress a certain way, not because you like it, but because it gets attention. You speak in ways that avoid conflict, not because you agree, but because you fear disapproval. You abandon your instincts, your standards, your voice, all in the name of staying liked. This is not connection. It's captivity. Approval becomes a drug. You chase it even as it drains your authenticity. And like any addiction, it comes withdrawal. The moment people pull back, you panic. You question yourself. You scramble to win them back. But here's the truth. The more you need approval, the less you own yourself. The Stoics warned us about this trap. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Why? Because growth demands you break away from the herd. And when you do, they will criticize you, not because you're wrong, but because you remind them of their own conformity. You cannot become your highest self while still begging to be accepted by the crowd. The man addicted to approval avoids solitude because silence doesn't clap for him. Silence doesn't validate him. And that's the medicine. You must detox. How? Start by observing yourself. Notice when you say things just to be liked. Notice the tension you feel when someone disagrees with you. Notice how quickly you betray your values just to avoid discomfort. Then sit with that discomfort. It will feel like rejection. It will feel like failure, but it's not. It's detox. When you stop performing for applause, you start speaking with truth. You stop chasing every opinion and start standing on principle. You learn to be misunderstood and still remain grounded. You learn to be alone and still feel complete. This is not arrogance, it's alignment. There is a quiet power in a man who no longer needs to be liked. He walks into a room, not to be noticed, but to observe. He doesn't react to every glance, every tone, every shift in mood. His validation comes from within. He doesn't say yes out of fear or no out of rebellion. He speaks what is necessary, when it is necessary, with a calm certainty that cannot be shaken. This is when your voice changes, literally. Your tone deepens. Your words slow down. Your energy carries weight, not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're no longer trying to please. And people notice, especially women, especially other men. They sense the difference between the one who chases validation and the one who commands respect. But you didn't get here overnight, and the detox won't happen overnight either. It takes time. It takes discomfort. It takes 100 moments of staying true to yourself when no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one is giving you the reaction you crave. But every time you stay grounded in those moments, you reclaim a piece of yourself. And piece by piece, you rebuild your integrity. So when the noise fades, when the applause dies, and you're left with only yourself, there's no panic, no emptiness, only clarity. Because the man who no longer needs the world's approval is finally free to live his truth. And that truth becomes even clearer in the next phase of your journey, when you choose solitude not as punishment, but as power. Solitude is not an escape. It is not a resignation from life. It is not the territory of the broken, the lonely, or the outcast. Solitude is a forge, and only those who step into it voluntarily will understand its fire. The man who has faced the silence and detoxed from approval now enters solitude not with fear, but with purpose. He doesn't see it as isolation. He sees it as alignment, a sacred space to strip away everything that isn't him. Because in a world that demands you become everything, solitude allows you to become yourself. You see, most men carry layers of masks: the professional mask, the social mask, the romantic mask. They perform, adapt, shift, shape themselves based on who's watching. But solitude watches with no judgment and no reward. It strips you clean. It removes the noise, the applause, the pressure, and what remains is what you really are. And that's where the real work begins. In solitude, you realize how much of your life has been reaction, not intention. You see how many of your desires were planted by others, how many of your habits were simply survival mechanisms, how much of your identity was built in response to fear. Now, for the first time, you can build something different, something authentic. This is when solitude becomes powerful. It sharpens your mind. You begin to see patterns. You make connections you couldn't see when your life was crowded. Ideas form. Insights rise. Creativity flows. You write with more clarity. You speak with more intention. You act with more conviction. Solitude teaches you boundaries, not just with others, but with yourself. You start to see which distractions waste your time, which relationships drain your energy, which habits numb your potential. And with no one around to impress, you finally develop the strength to say no without guilt. This is the foundation of self-respect. The man who honors his solitude no longer fills his time with noise. He fills it with purpose. He wakes up early, not because he must, but because he can. He walks in nature. He writes what he thinks, not what he thinks will go viral. He reads slowly. He eats mindfully. He reflects deeply. These are not aesthetic routines, these are acts of sovereignty. The Stoics practiced this. Marcus Aurelius would isolate himself even in a palace. Seneca warned of being busy without meaning. They knew that only in solitude can the soul breathe, expand, and realign. You begin to see solitude as sacred time, a ritual, a personal temple where you return to clarity. And with clarity comes standards. You stop tolerating chaos. You stop explaining your worth. You stop watering dead plants, whether they're jobs, friendships, or relationships. You become deeply grounded in your own values. You know what you want. You know what you will never allow again. You no longer settle just to feel connected, because now you're connected to something far greater, yourself. This is when others begin to notice a shift. You don't chase anymore. You attract. Not because you're playing a game, but because your solitude has made you magnetic. It has burned away the neediness, the fear, the desperation. What remains is presence, power, peace. And it's not loud, it's quiet, but it's undeniable. You speak slower, you move with purpose. You're not easily shaken. People respect you, often without knowing why. Because you're no longer projecting false signals. You're radiating something most men don't have anymore: clarity. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself forever. Solitude is not a cage, it's a cathedral. You return to the world, but not as you were. You're not looking for something out there to complete you. You're sharing what's already complete within you. And the more time you spend in solitude, the more you return to yourself. This is the paradox. Solitude, when embraced, doesn't disconnect you from the world. It reconnects you to it. Not through dependence, but through depth. Because the man who knows how to be alone is the only man who's truly ready to connect. So when people leave, you don't fall apart. When plans fail, you don't collapse. When chaos comes, you don't panic. You've built something in the silence that the noise cannot destroy. You have become unshakable. But this transformation through solitude leads to something even more refined. When your mind is clear, your values firm, and your heart steady, you begin to move through life differently. You walk, speak, and choose with authority. You no longer just survive, you lead. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. How solitude sharpens your clarity, deepens your strength, and elevates your standards as a grounded masculine force. The man who has embraced solitude does not return to the world unchanged. He returns sharpened. There's a noticeable difference, not just in his energy, but in how he moves, how he listens, and what he no longer tolerates. He doesn't need to announce it. It's written in his presence. Because solitude doesn't just clean out noise, it carves out clarity about what matters, about who you are when no one's watching, about what you will give your time to, and what you will never accept again. With clarity comes strength, not the kind you show off in the gym, but the kind you carry in your soul. The strength to say no without explanation, the strength to walk away from what feels wrong, even when it looks right, the strength to trust your gut over public opinion. You begin to walk lighter, but stand firmer. You're no longer swayed by every new trend, every emotional reaction, every shifting mood. You respond instead of react. You listen more than you speak. And when you do speak, your words carry weight. This is the grounded man, calm, clear, unmoved by trivialities. He doesn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He doesn't need to control others. He has mastered himself, and that's why people are drawn to him. In a world of chaos, he is order. In a world of noise, he is silence. In a world of shallow performance, he is rooted depth. But this grounding doesn't make you rigid. It makes you precise. You start living by principle, not pressure. You make fewer decisions, but they're sharper. You build slower, but with intention. You speak less, but everything you say matters more. You no longer chase relationships, status, recognition. You attract, because people sense that you're not performing, you're living truthfully, and truth is magnetic. You also develop what the Stoics called ataraxia, a deep inner stillness, free from disturbance. This doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you are no longer controlled by what you feel. The opinions of others, noted but not obeyed. The chaos around you, observed but not absorbed. The pressure to conform, seen but not followed. Because your life now has a center, and it's not out there. It's within. This shift affects everything. You stop entertaining shallow conversations. You crave depth. You stop chasing people who don't reciprocate. You let them go, without resentment. You stop explaining yourself to those who've already decided who you are. Your standards rise, not because you think you're better than others, but because you finally remember your value. You no longer settle for what's convenient. You wait for what's right. You no longer stay in situations out of fear. You exit with clarity, and you don't look back, because solitude taught you something the world never could. You are enough. You don't need more to be more. You don't need validation to be valuable. You don't need a crowd to feel confident. You know who you are, and that knowing becomes your compass. This is what makes you dangerous in the best way. Not to others, but to every system that wants to keep you numb, reactive, and distracted. You've unplugged, you've returned to yourself, and that return has made you powerful. Not loud, not aggressive, but undeniably centered. People will ask what changed. They'll sense something different. They'll notice you're harder to provoke, slower to speak, quicker to walk away, clearer in your boundaries. You won't need to explain. Just continue walking with the quiet confidence of a man who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. And now, as your solitude has sculpted this grounded presence, it's time to reflect. To stand still one last time and recognize the man you've become. Because the journey doesn't end in solitude, it begins there. Let's return to the silence one more time. Look at who you were before the silence, and look at who you are now. The man who once feared being alone has walked through the fire. He's stripped away the noise, let go of the need to be liked, and faced the raw truth of who he is. And he did it alone. Not because no one cared, but because no one could do it for him. This is the path of the grounded man. Not the loudest, not the most visible, but the most unshakable. A man who stands where others stumble. A man who remains still while the world spins in chaos. You've learned that solitude isn't loneliness, it's power. That silence isn't absence, it's presence. That being alone doesn't mean you're lost, it means you're becoming. The Stoics didn't glorify pain, they didn't worship suffering, but they knew that true clarity only comes when you remove distractions. That real peace is not found in comfort, but in alignment. You are no longer pulled in every direction. You are no longer at the mercy of the crowd. You don't flinch at rejection. You don't beg for attention. You walk with your own rhythm. You lead with your own voice. And in that quiet strength, you become a lighthouse. Not to save everyone, but to show what's possible when a man stops running and starts listening, when he stops chasing the world and starts building himself. You are that man now. And when you walk alone, you do not walk in weakness. You walk in mastery. As Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't keep walking alone. Subscribe to the Stoic Spirit and join a community of men who are done with the noise and ready to forge something real. Leave a comment below. What has solitude revealed to you? Your story might be the mirror another man needs. And remember, this path isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's not about being the loudest. It's about standing firm when it matters most. This is your brotherhood in silence. This is your strength in solitude. Forge within.